Happy New Year, everyone. I'm really pleased to have with me Chris Gleason this afternoon. Chris is an entrepreneur, business owner, investigator, and Chris is the one who's come up with the campaign finance mules that we've reported on Gateway Pundit. I think we're one of the few places that have reported on this, and it is just an amazing development. And Chris, thanks for giving us some of your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me on, Jim. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to start. I first heard about you and spoke with you through our friend Jay Valentine, and I know you've done some work with him.
Yeah.
And I know that you're aware of the ERIC system, the voter rolls, the issues we have there with these bloated voter rolls. And I know you're familiar with the fractal system. Is that how did you become involved? Was that through Jay?
Actually, no. I got involved with Jay once I was getting into the election integrity stuff here in Florida. We actually found, or one of my developers and I, we were trying to solve a problem in Washington State, data problem, and we figured this out. And what happened was we're trying to identify who were the voters in Washington State and who were most likely to donate. And we were trying to kind of figure out what all was going on there. And the first thing that happened was we got this, we parsed a bunch of data and looked at it, and it didn't seem right. It seemed a little on the crazy side. And so I checked with my developer and asked him, hey, what's going on here? Is this right? And he's like, yeah, these numbers are right. And I'm like, oh, really? So we had identified thousands upon thousands of people in Washington State who were donating thousands upon thousands of times. And I'm like, this is wrong. This has got to be wrong. And so we started looking into it. We wanted to see if there was another pattern. We wanted to see if this was an established pattern. So I happened to be doing some stuff on a project in Oklahoma. And I validated my findings in Oklahoma. And I had been reporting on illegal in-kind campaign contributions by big tech to the Secretary of State here in Florida. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, we found some really crazy stuff in Washington State, in Oklahoma, and I want to see if it's going on here. Can you send me a copy of the campaign finance database for the state of Florida? And they're like, yeah, sure. So we got that, and we ended up adding that data for Florida into the mix. And what we were able to identify is not only was this pattern of campaign finance mules and irregularity, really money laundering, we established that it was going on in these 3 states. And it was also going on in Florida on the local level. So as we're investigating this, we started looking at the individuals directly. And so we checked out the individuals using, open source public records. And what we found is that, there were patterns in the data. There were patterns in the individuals. What we found was a lot of them were unemployed. A lot of them had no, or at least they were reported as not employed in the federal campaign finance database or in the state campaign finance database. And these weren't, your George Soros type of donors. These weren't people who lived in multi-million-dollar houses. These were, average Americans who were donating in a way that it just defied all logic and reason. And so as I was individually investigating these people, I started asking around. I started asking people in my daily life, people I knew, and I would say, "Hey, let me ask you a question. If you were, what would you say, would be normal for a person to donate to a political campaign during an election year?" And they would say to me, two, three times, maybe four. I'm like, okay, how much money? And they're like, oh, a couple $100. I'm like, okay. On the high end, what would you say that would be? Maybe 20, 30, 24, maybe, that would be on the high end. And so I started asking other people who I knew were active in politics. And I ended up talking to a lobbyist, and a lobbyist was like, well, I'm on the extreme end of the bell curve, and I donate about 24 times or so, 24 to 30 times, to the tune of maybe around $20,000. And I was like, oh, okay. And you're the extreme. And they were like, yeah, definitely the extreme. I said, okay. And now to everybody I've asked this question to, I get a pretty consistent answer. And I asked them, I'm like, what would you say if I told you that there were people who were donating 2,000 times during an election year, 3,000 times an election year? They all said, there's something that's not right. There's something going on here. And I'm like, yeah, there's definitely something going on here. And so, as I've been presented other opportunities to check in other states, like when I was asked to look into Missouri, we found some pretty astonishing numbers there. And it just sets the pattern. It's the pattern. When you have John Q. Public, who lives in a $400,000 house, donating more money in Missouri than the heirs to the Anheuser-Busch family, you got some questions going on there.
Yeah, very much so. So tell me this. Obviously, we have a lot of questions, but you're finding this in about everywhere you've looked. You found it. We saw it. You did an amazing report. We saw this in Georgia with Raphael Warnock. There was several $1 million of donations to him. And now we're seeing this only going to Democrat candidates. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
That's not entirely correct. I would say a wide margin of it is going to Democrat candidates. It is going on the Republican side as well. Typically, that money is running to more establishment Republican candidates, or Republican candidates that don't necessarily have the support of the people. We did notice in Florida, one of the top campaign finance mules who was donating to Republicans was donating a fair amount of money to Mitch McConnell. And so there's
that's very interesting then. So but you this isn't by chance, and this isn't something that that's just probably just started, and
no.
But it is startling. Now, if they're making smaller donations, that's what you found mostly. You could tell us about this, but if they are making smaller donations, would that go under the radar then? And what type of donations are you seeing?
So they really do range. They do have a really wide range. A lot of them are small, $5, $10, $20, 50 cents. I mean, it runs the gamut. It really does run the gamut. And so as we've been looking at more and more data, and we are looking at a lot of data at this point, we've identified some really big ones. We've identified some in Maryland more recently. I was asked to give some expert testimony and evidence with regards to my findings in the state of Maryland. And in doing so, we found several individuals who had donated, it defies logic. So we had the top one that we've seen so far donated over 19,000 times, 19,000 times between the 2020 election cycle and the 2022 election cycle, over 19,000 times. Now, you would say, oh, that's an outlier. But really, it's not, because we found other people who donated 18,000 times, 17,000 times, 15,000 times, 10,000 times. We found one person in Maryland who had donated over 9,000 times in the 2022 election cycle. So
that's crazy. That's insane.
So to be able to make that level of donations, I ran a calculation on one mule yesterday, and it worked out so that they were making 0.9 donations every hour of every day for the past 2 years, not taking off any nights or weekends.
So that's 24 hours a day, not 8 hours a day. You're talking 24 hours a day.
Yeah. I mean, if you break it down, if you're, on the average, yeah. I mean, now, when you see this stuff, you got to ask some questions. And that's what we've been really working on doing. And so how do you explain it? How do you explain all of these donations and how they're being made and how the money's being routed? Because they all follow a very similar pattern. And so as we're looking at it and we're seeing this stuff happen, something occurred to us, because this particular project that I was working on in Maryland, there were several parts to it. Part of it was related to the machines and how the voting machines operate. And one of the other experts that was working on this, an election integrity expert who goes by the pseudonym, Lady Draza, brilliant young lady, brilliant lady, and she was explaining to me how mathematically they are allocating the proper amounts of votes, both by changing the results on the machines and in generating enough vote by mail ballots to keep the election looking normal, but still facilitating and guaranteeing that they're going to steal it. And as we were talking, she and I both arrived at the same conclusion that this is, definitely done via algorithm. It's definitely done programmatically. And, the real question is, how are they doing it? And what we're seeing is, as needs arise to fund certain things in certain races, they're using these money mules to get dark money into the campaigns and into the PACs that are needed to fund operations. But we won't just say campaigns, because ultimately what we look at here is a mechanism, a financial mechanism, the financial mechanism, in fact, that they're using to finance the entire takeover and corruption of the entire voting process, the entire electoral process, from the funding of nonprofits like ERIC that are injecting bad data into the rolls. The get out the vote registration efforts. They got to pay for that, and they've got umpteen different leftist bad actors who are ensuring that the voter rolls are stocked full of bad data so that they can then subsequently mail vote by mail ballots that they can harvest. Okay.
Right.
Fund the post, the drop boxes, fund the mules that collect the ballots. Okay. Fund. I mean, this is how they're doing it every step of the way. And, a lot of this stuff, really dates back to when Barack Obama decided that he was going to fundamentally transform America. And, the stuff that we're seeing, there's really no logical or reasonable explanation. There's no mathematical explanation for this activity other than fraud. So the interesting thing about this case in Maryland, it's a civil case, and it was kicked out by a federal judge, Obama judge. And so the evidence and facts that I and these other people, these other election integrity experts have presented, have been refiled in a motion for reconsideration. And the goal here is to move this case into multi-district litigation, because ultimately, this entire thing is a RICO case. The level of corruption, the level of crimes to this, it's really, it's shocking. It really is shocking. So you have, through the manipulation of the machines that we know have online capability, they have cellular modems. This has all been documented. Okay. With that, the patents that were filed on these machines by the machine manufacturers, right? Well, really one manufacturer, because it was ES&S, and they were broken up in 2010. But the machines, whether it's a Dominion machine or an ES&S machine, it's the same machine with the same software and the same firmware in these vote theft machines. And so, here we have these machines that are being used in fraud to defraud Americans of their right to vote, right? These machines were obtained using federal money, federal grants, which is a crime. It's a major crime because the dollar amount is over $1 million, right? So you've got major federal fraud. You've got wire fraud because this activity is going on online, okay? The online manipulation of the voter rolls that we saw here in Florida and in other states. So you've got wire fraud there. You've got mail fraud, where you have the altered records contributing to the theft of the election via the mail, right? That's mail fraud. Then we have the ballot harvesting. We have the drop boxes. Then we have the tabulation machines. We have all of this stuff, the stuff that Rumbeck is doing. Rumbeck has some pretty interesting software, and it's called ballot duplication software. And I first found out about this when we were looking into the way Maryland and the tech that Maryland uses to run its elections. So we found in the public data the fact that the state of Maryland pays Runbeck for ballot duplication software and printing for the vote by mail ballots. Now, you have to ask, what is ballot duplication software? Well, ballot duplication software is by definition vote forging software. So ballot duplication software by Rumbeck, as explained by them and as explained in their patent, is essentially this. You get a ballot that's damaged, okay? You have a damaged ballot or a ballot that you don't like. You scan it using this software. Well, it's scanned, and then somebody gets to adjudicate the ballot and determine the voter's intent. Well, who has the right to interpret the voter's intent? I mean, it's not done, and it's done with no oversight. It's done with no chain of custody. So now here's where it gets really interesting, right? So this now newly adjudicated ballot, it creates a brand new ballot altogether, a brand new ballot. And then they're able to print the ballot and then cast the ballot. And now you have a paper ballot that jives with the data on the machine.
Yeah, that's
Isn't that
amazing.
crazy?
It's insane. You unloaded a lot of information in that in there. For one, so the Maryland report is not released yet, but you're planning on releasing that soon. Is that correct? And that's on the campaign mules, finance mules. And that's going to be huge. You also have a lawsuit that's going on there. Is that your lawsuit, or is that a different group, but you're familiar with it?
It's a different group. The lawsuit is it's Lois Ann Gibson et al. Plaintiffs, Maryland 2020 Watch et al. Versus various individuals within the state of Maryland. Like I said, this is going to be a move where they're trying to move it into the multi-district litigation court, and they are they are naming the members of the board on the Federal Elections Commission and other elected officials who have contributed to the theft of our elections and the overthrowing of our constitutional government. So it is crazy. So, ultimately, what we've uncovered it is going on in every state. I can guarantee you at this point. Particularly, I know it's going on here in Florida. Florida does not have free and fair elections. It is not the gold standard by any stretch of any imagination. And the level of corruption that goes on, that's going on, that is directly attributable to this entire corrupt process, this entire RICO action, goes right down to the county level. I mean, you have the county recs, the Republican Executive Committee here in Pinellas County. I mean, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. The first thing that we found, I brought to the Republican Executive Committee. I said, "Hey, we have this huge problem. You guys got to stop this." And they said, he's the current chair now. All right, he was elected through a rigged election. Yeah, it's funny. He said to me, all elections since the beginning of time have been stolen and rigged, and there's nothing that you can do to stop it.
What?
That's what he's
crazy.
Now, you know what's crazy about it, right? His day job, he's the executive director for the state attorney's office. And he's he was handpicked by DeSantis on the Judicial Review Board. He's the chair of the Judicial Review Board.
There's something very, very troubling with that development there. Yeah.
Really?
That's really amazing.
I mean, so.
But I thought Florida was cleaner than other places. And obviously they're not having the same issues. I mean, look at Arizona, look at Georgia, just seems out of whack to me. And then, of course, Michigan and Wisconsin. I think Florida, at least,
It's
they
better
have
than
something going.
we do. We're the least ugliest house on the street.
I think that's, yeah, thank you.
That's the least ugliest house on the street.
And you know what's interesting is it does seem like it really is an assault on our entire election system, and just to certainly we've seen this since 2020. You know, with the Trump election and then 2022, but maybe before that, I bet it probably was even happening before that. But
absolutely, I mean, it was absolutely. I mean, these machines are being used globally to overthrow legitimate governments and take away the consent of the governed from people. You know, the big questions that people need to be asking, and we're seeking the answers to these questions, ultimately are, who are the real owners of these machines? So ES&S is owned by a private equity fund, okay? So who are the partners in that fund? And moreover, who are the limited partners in that fund? You know, and I think that when we peel that onion, I think we're going to get some startling and very entertaining answers. You know, at the end of the day, this is all about money and power and influence. And what these campaign finance mules have done or are doing, it's essentially a way for dark money, foreign and domestic, to essentially buy and corrupt our entire electoral process. I mean, the fact that these machines allow for adjudication on them without any real audit trail, it's a total corruption and violation of our system. It's fraud. It's a total fraud. And, you know, we don't have elections. We have selections. And the only way that we can fix this is if we get rid of these machines entirely and go to elections held on one day in person with an ID, a paper ballot, and manual hand count. Because the entire system as it is today is broken. I mean, it's irreparably broken.
right.
Absolutely.
And we've seen that in, you know, several states now. It's disappointing. You know, you see California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, now New Mexico. They start going with the Democrats. The Democrats implement the mail-in ballots, and then the state's lost forever. It doesn't matter how good the candidate is, who's a Republican who's running. Doesn't, and we have had some stellar candidates even this past election who are running out on the West Coast, and it doesn't matter how good they are. They're just not going to win an election there. I thought a great example of this was in Oregon. There was this young kid who was the hero on the Paris train terrorist attack. Some young guy, him and his buddies stopped the terror attack. He runs for Congress against a far left radical in a rural district, and yet somehow he loses to this far left radical out in Oregon. And it's like, you know, it makes you scratch your head. How is this happening? We're seeing this more and more. I think it's more blatant right now, you know, than ever. And here's the thing. How is there any hope that we can get the rules and the laws changed so that we can have elections with paper ballots on one day? Is there any hope for that?
I believe that there is, because at the end of the day, I don't believe for 1 second that this many Americans are voting the way that they are. And I know because simply this, look at the massive propaganda apparatus that is going on as targeting, and under Obama was weaponized to be used against the American public. Okay. I mean, you've got Thomson Reuters, the AP, and all of these other real propaganda outlets, right? You know, you've got big tech censoring people like, you know, the Gateway Pundit, you know, purging people like me off the internet entirely, you know. I mean, it's crazy. Now, if the government was really operating with the consent of the governed at the state, at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, they wouldn't have to do this. And we know that they're not. We know this. I mean, we know this to be true. When people go and canvass, you know, during the election cycles, you know, there is so much fraud, you know, that it's in the rolls, and it's all. I mean, it's all a fiction, all of it. It's all a fiction. I mean, I remember the Barack Obama Mitt Romney election, and I don't know if you recall that one.
Sure.
That was the first election that I saw significant tech interference by Facebook. They were playing games with the news feeds and algorithms right around the Benghazi stuff when all of that was going on, because they were trying to control the narrative. Okay. One of the other things that I observed, and if you go and you look, you'll see that particular election had very low voter participation because nobody liked Romney and nobody liked Obama. But
right.
And I think that was the catalyst for this new leg of the overthrow of the American government. And I believe that the left, they got really scared with Donald Trump. And they saw, you know, because who wanted Hillary Clinton? I mean,
right.
And they were pretty convinced that they were going to steal it pretty good. And they underestimated a lot of things and they lost. And that election, and they didn't want to take any chances. In that election, they did a lot of the cheating. They did a lot of the stealing. But now we have gone beyond, 2018, when, big tech, because big tech in 2018 took out a massive amount of online voices of dissent 3 weeks prior to the midterms. I was part of it, Doug Giles was part of it. America's Freedom Fighters was part of it. Brian Colfage was part of it. I mean, a lot of people got hit. And, between that group of us, there was about 500 page owners and group owners, we had collectively over 100 million fans and followers on social media with 2 billion weekly post views. That is powerful. And they had lost control of that in 2016. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but I remember very, very clearly that after the surprise loss that they suffered, George Soros called a meeting at the Mandarin Hotel in Washington, D.C. to do an after-action review of their operations. And they swore that that was not going to happen again. And they took us out pretty succinctly in 2018. As a matter of fact, after they took us out, Media Matters did a post, or they had done a story about how Facebook had gotten a lot of the bad actors, myself and some of my good friends named us. However, they missed some other bad actors. And then a day later, they got wiped out too. And so we know Soros is involved in this beyond any shadow of a doubt, and his organizations, his nonprofits, they're the ones that are utilizing the money mules. Because if you look at the way that the money is flowing throughout the election process, you can see how they're doing it. And so that's the big thing that we've been really digging into about how the money flows and what's really going on. And, the FEC, they have a lot of explaining to do, because what we've found is stuff that they should have been doing all along.
Right.
It's willful. It's omission. It's act by omission. It's neglect of duty. I mean, I have we have multiple emails into these guys, multiple complaints, and they won't acknowledge it.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy.
Now you have you found these results in several states with these numerous people who are retired. You know, we put those up or weren't working, and they're sending out the thousands of donations to these people, not just in their state but all over the country. Yeah. And you said you contacted the FEC to complain about this, and what was their response?
Crickets.
Nothing. That's really stunning. They haven't given you any type of explanation. Nothing. That is a story in itself. That is pretty amazing.
I feel bad for Dinesh D'Souza. You know, I mean, they railroaded him. The DOJ, the FBI. I mean, I know that they read the Gateway Pundit. So you mean to tell me that nobody in the DOJ or FBI? What? Well, why not? Why aren't they investigating this? Because it's not politically expedient. Because everybody's dirty, so everybody's clean. Why is that?
Yeah,
I mean,
it sounds like it would be it would significantly hurt the Democrat Party. Is what it looks like. Is that the reason they're not looking at this?
So if you look at the amount of money run through their money laundering mechanism and tool called Act Blue, okay? If you look at that for the 2020 election, there was over $4 billion run through Act Blue. $4 billion. Do you mean to
how did you get that number, Chris?
Right from the FEC website.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And do you think part of that, I know we put something up on Gateway Pundit, but when the riots were breaking out in 2020, there was some reports that the donations were actually going to Act Blue. They weren't going to Black Lives Matter in some cases.
Well, you know, the funny thing about it is the Black Lives Matter PAC, it's situated in the George Soros evil enterprise address in Washington, D.C.
Well, there you go.
How does that work?
Yeah. So do you think you've pinned down that these the original money, the lump sums, is coming from? You think it's Soros and other liberal organizations that's going then to these funding mules, these campaign funding mules? You think it's from? Have you pinpointed where it's coming, or is this just a theory at this point?
We're in the process of validating and making sure that we are correct in what we're doing, and we don't. We have enough at this point to flip the script on what is going on. And we believe and we know that we can show enough that there is probable cause. So if we actually had a real justice system, okay, if we had real integrity at the FEC, if we had real integrity at the FBI, if we had real integrity at the IRS or DOJ, okay, there's enough here that would, if they were, you know, doing their job and honoring their oath, novel idea, right? To honor their oath and not be complicit in this the financing of treason and financing of the overthrow, you know, they would have probable cause in order, they would have probable cause to open up a real investigation into all of this stuff. I mean, we know where and how to do it. We just, right now, we're having to use methods with open source intelligence and talking to people and talking to some of these individuals who have been acting as money laundering mules. And we have enough of them targeted, and enough of, as we continue down our investigations path, we get more and more data from each part of this we get one more puzzle piece, and we have a real good understanding of how this is done, because it's all being done automated. It's being done by computer, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So who has the ability to do that and steer the donations? Think about it, right? So who's doing that? Because the data that we get, we're just getting it from the FEC, right? I mean, we're using their repository of data. So the next logical thing that you have to ask is, where do they get this data from? I mean, it's not like they have access to the bank accounts, right? No. They're getting the data from ActBlue. So is ActBlue really being honest about the dispersal of these donations? Are they? I don't know. It warrants further investigation, I would think.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, if I was a federal law enforcement official, you know, that would be where I would look. I mean, the IRS is investigating people over what, $500 PayPal transfers?
Yeah. Yeah. How about 1,000 different political donations? You'd think that would raise a red flag.
Well, and we did we identified over 52 million individual donations nationwide that were made by people who are not employed.
52 million. That's where you are now? And how many states have you looked at, or is that from a national database?
That's a national database. That's from the national number. 52 million individual donations by people who are not employed. I think the question is, who's going to answer this question? Who's going to answer the question? Because, you know, the people who were supposed to be investigating this have neglected their duty. And at this point, they are willfully looking the other way, because there's no way that we have a pattern here. At what point does this end?
Right. So tell me about the upcoming news that you have coming out, and what we can look for.
So we have some interesting stuff with this suit, this multi-district litigation RICO suit. And I'm pretty certain that people are going to be shocked at who gets named in this. Because at the end of the day, with RICO, right, the whole idea of RICO was to be able to take out these bad actors who were typically pretty hard to pin down, right? Well, we should be able to do that pretty easy, because, you know, our burden of proof here is, did they materially benefit from this? And how did they materially benefit from this? And what were their actions in the conspiracy? And, you know, we've got intent. We've got the mind to do the intent. We've got the activity. So where is this going to go? Where is it going to lead to? I think it's going to lead to people like Barack Obama. It's going to lead to people in the FBI, the executives in the FBI. It's going to lead to executives in the IRS. It's going to lead to executives at the FEC. It's going to lead to local officials. It's going to lead to attorneys generals. I mean, this has very, very wide-ranging implications, because, in essence, the entire system is broken and corrupt.
That's what it sounds like. Well, please keep us posted, Chris. I know we'll be talking often about
Yes.
what's happening in your latest developments. But I appreciate this. Thank you for this is just a startling development that we had no idea was happening, taking place. I think most Americans still don't have any idea that this is happening, but it's through your work that we're starting to get the message out, and it's very, very interesting. So thank you for all the work you're doing here, and
Hey,
please
Jim,
keep us
thanks for
posted.
having us. Thanks for giving us a voice, and thanks for helping us spread the word.
All right, Chris. Thanks a
All
lot.
right.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.